And welcome to Mixed Media Live. We're excited to be here this week. We weren't here last week because of a bunch of conspiring factors, but we're excited, we're rejuvenated to talk about three great topics this week. And those are going to be about surviving a recession / inflation, about the golden era of music in Hollywood, and also about how to entice new gamers better in the gaming industry. I'm one of the co-hosts, Irving Nestor. I'm a media entrepreneur. I own a company called Ariella Productions. It's a film and media company, and I'll pass you over to Ben to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flutist and a media composer.
And Nathan?
Hey, I'm Nathan. I'm a 3D modeler and programmer on games.
Yeah, and so we're Mixed Media. We're here every Friday at 7 p.m. Every Friday, barring anything catastrophic. And we like to talk about film, gaming, music, anything art-related, honestly, whether it's philosophy or business or whatever. And yeah, we just like to share that conversation with you. That's why we go live. So if you're live right now, if you chat, you'll be part of the conversation. And in fact, I've got a cool perk for you if you ask for it now or during the live stream at all. If you just type that you want whiteboard access, over to the right of the screen, there is a beautiful whiteboard. Hello. That you can draw on too during the stream if you want to have fun with us, as long as you're responsible, of course. If you chat in the chat right now that you would like whiteboard privileges, Nathan's monitoring chat and he'll give those privileges to you. A few housekeeping items before we begin. On the screen also is a link or a URL that will take you to all of our links. So if you want to listen to this in podcast form later, if you want to find other platforms that we're on, like our Instagram, whatever, it's ariella.co/mixedmedia, ariella.co/mixedmedia, and all of our links are on there. This week on YouTube in particular, our publishing schedule might be a little bit weird. We're trying out splitting out our segments into 3. So instead of posting on Sunday, all of them at once, it'll probably be something like the first one on Saturday, the next one on Monday, and the last one on Thursday, something like that. But if you want access to everything all at once, right after we finish streaming, you got to go to mixedmedia.locals.com. And for free, I post the link to the raw live stream where you can check out the unedited version of this podcast if you want to see the chat roll live or anything like that. Or if you want to see any gaffes that I cut out, you can go to mixedmedia.locals.com and the raw stream will be available there. Yeah, I think that's it. Besides that, how have your guys' weeks been?
I'd say it's been a pretty nice week. I'm here on the East Coast, so a lot of the cicadas are coming out. Luckily, it's not too loud at the moment. Otherwise, you probably would hear them. If you give it maybe next week, will be a buzz of cicadas when I try talking.
Ew, that's nasty. Nathan, didn't you have like a job interview this week or something?
I had like a billion, yeah.
Oh, a billion.
I had one yesterday. Well, I had one today. Sorry, yeah, I had one today. I had one earlier today. I had like one 2 days ago. Another one like last week, I think, or this week. I don't know. There's a lot. There's a lot. I applied to a lot of internships and one job. I didn't expect to receive an interview from all of them. So yeah, I'm dealing with that. Almost done though. I have one more interview next week, and I have to do some. They're all programming jobs, so I have to do some coding tests by next week, and then I'm good.
How'd they go? Like, you feel good about any of them?
Yeah, so like the one they did today, he was like, "Oh yeah, you fit the company culture well," and we don't. So they're based in Kentucky, right? We normally don't take remote. I'd be doing remote, obviously, considering I'm not about to fly to Kentucky every day, you know. So, yeah, he said we don't usually allow remote internships, but we think that you fit the company culture very well. I was like, oh, Does that mean
That's
I'm
really
in? I
good.
didn't ask him if that means I'm in, but like he was like, just do this coding test thing. You said you don't even have to if you want it, if you don't want to. So I'm like, I'll
Ooh,
do it anyways, right? So I did it. Oh, didn't do it yet, but I accepted it, and yeah, I'll do that, and hopefully I'll make it there. So yeah, so far I'm at I think I might be going for 100% acceptance rate. That'd be nice.
yeah, no, that's pretty cool. That sounds really good. Yeah, and
Mhm.
Ben, aren't you go? When do you move to LA?
I'm gonna move out at the beginning of August.
Oh wow, okay, yeah. How do you feel about it?
Um, I'm, kind of nervous. Big, big jump from the East Coast, where I've been my whole life, to the West Coast, but it's it's still the center of a lot of what I want to do. The film, media, music world. So
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's exciting. For me, I'm about to launch a new business venture into real estate marketing, so I'm really excited about that. And I'm wrapping up, or I just finished a rough cut for a web series of the first episode of that web series in terms of the picture edit. And director is really happy with it. So when director's happy, I'm happy. So it's been a good week, I think. Um, and yeah, I guess I'll just hop into my topic. I think we've got a few people watching, and if you're watching, just a reminder that if you comment, we're monitoring chat, and so if you have anything to say about anything at all, have disagree, agree, or have any questions, especially when it comes to what I'm going to talk about, if you have any personalized questions, then just comment in the chat. Nathan is monitoring chat. I'll try my best to monitor chat as well, and we'll incorporate you into the podcast.
so I guess I'll be completely changing gears and actually talking about um, artistic history. And I think, as Irving mentioned earlier, I want to talk a little bit about golden age, and kind of specifically early golden age Hollywood film music, and kind of through the mostly through the figure of Eric Korngold, um, and kind of look at a little bit what the difference in how music directors thought of music's role in films were then and compared to now. In Hollywood, the first film score, first movie that had an original film score, not just like music that was adapted, pre-existing music that was adapted for it, was Max Steiner's score in 1933 for King Kong. Sorry, um, and that kind of began the era in Hollywood of the well the he kind of set the tone for the orchestral score, and that led to the kind of importation of a lot of Austrian and Germanic talent. So Korngold came over the next year, 1934. Or, well, he started composing in 34. It doesn't come to the United States until 1937, I believe. Um, yeah, so Hollywood's a little bit behind other countries. Like, I know Russia is Shostakovich was scoring films, and I think he scored his first film in 1929. So the capability existed before then, but not until 1933 did Hollywood have an original score. I could go on for a really long time about Korngold. That's probably a future episode to kind of talk about more about who Korngold was, and what exactly he does in his music, because I could spend all day going into like the details of what he's actually doing in his film music, scene by scene, orchestrationally fascinating stuff. But we'll save that. But essentially, he starts composing. Like I said, 1935. I think his first film was Captain Blood. He does 16 films over the next 12 years. Um, he he like Max Steiner, kind of bringing this Germanic late romantic operatic tradition. They're both mostly opera composers over in Austria, and that kind of gives a lot of the early golden age of scores, it's flavor. And in some ways, a lot of later film music is trying to return to this Germanic flavor that they create. So they're really setting the standards of what film music in the United States, at least, sounds like and what it does. When we talk about breaking the conventions of lots of conventions in film scoring, you're talking about breaking the rules, basically, that Steiner and Korngold and Newman set. They figured out how to deal with a lot of common film music problems, and we, either follow their techniques or not. I spent this past Sunday watching two films scored by Korngold, 1938, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and the 1940, The Seahawk, which are, I think, generally regarded as his two best scores, although I don't know that people really find any of them better than the other ones. But those are the most famous ones. The score for The Adventures of Robin Hood, in particular, is considered one of the most important film scores of all time. I have known both of these scores just as scores, just as music for many, many years. They've both had a really big impact on me and how I compose. I mentioned to Irving that some of the music for The Adventures of Robin Hood, the main titles, was actually inspiration for some music I wrote for one of his films. So, but I've never seen either film, and I'm not really familiar with that whole era of early Hollywood films. So I will say that you got to listen to music, but you also need to watch some of these films, because they're so different than what we get now for so many reasons. And I'm not gonna attempt to explain why I think 1938, 1940 is different than 2021. But the storytelling overall is very different. But what is different about the role that music played? And this is not necessarily for better or worse, because I'm going to contrast a little bit with some fantastic film music. I'd like to ask you two, what do you feel like music's role is in film right now? I mean, that's a pretty broad question, but what's your impression? Like, what do you think music generally, a director wants to do with music in a film?
The way I've thought about music in films is that it acts as a sort of subtext for the movie. So, the director plays with the visuals and, I guess writing stuff, the script, I mean. Well, I guess to be a writer, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. The visuals and dialogue on one end, and they are telling one story, but the music is capable of telling either the same story or another story, as in like sort of part of the story that's not told. So for example, musical foreshadowing is a way of telling part of the story that is not explicitly said by a character or something like that, or it's not said visually. So yeah, my take on what I believe music is for. Music is to convey some sort of message that the visuals and the dialogue does not.
Okay, yeah, that's something I think a lot of people would say, and I think that's definitely a lot of what is happening these days. In some ways, I would call it kind of guiding us through the story, things that aren't visually or verbally present.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I would actually say that's probably even gotten more simple over time in its role. It's like almost like just mood setting these days, like just brushing a scene with like an overall mood so that we get it, or like we can be helped to the mood that the scene is supposed to be to give off.
I think it's worth noting that I just realized I got that in part from my Hans Zimmer masterclass, so that has shaped my idea of what music is for.
Okay, well, Hans Zimmer certainly knows what music's role is in film right now. Yeah, I would say there are kind of two things. Depends how you define it. Maybe three main things. The first is Irving kind of alluded to is ambient mood setting. The music doesn't have to have a defined shape; it just kind of is there. It gives us some mood. It tells us to be excited in case the action is not as exciting as it should be. That's an age-old problem. Korngold actually finishes his film composing career in 1947, in part because he felt like his music was being asked to cover too many deficiencies in films as time went on. So I think the other thing that music tends to be used for, this is a term that, I'm not sure that I had really associated with film scoring until seeing it and hearing it everywhere from actual people in the film scoring world. Composers right now, they don't necessarily mean this in a negative way, but I think the vast majority of film composers tend to describe what they do as emotional manipulation. They don't necessarily, most people don't see that as a negative thing, and people tend to say that it's even more pronounced. Obviously, it's more pronounced when a film has a message, and especially noticeable. And I agree, in documentary films. The more the director wants to persuade you of an idea, the more emotionally manipulative it is. Again, it doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation to a lot of film composers. Some composers do think it's a negative thing, but a lot of people really think that that's just the state of things, and it's not good or bad. So in an example of that, I mean, I guess, as I said earlier, letting us feel something that we don't organically feel. Trying to get us, it doesn't have to be associated with a message, but I think film composers would call it emotional manipulation if the action scene is not tense without the music, and they need to make the music extra tense so that you actually feel, wow, there's some real danger here. I think that would be what composers call emotional manipulation.
Not like the James Bond score, right? Like you were talking about the other week. It's kind of the antithesis of that, almost.
Yeah, I think that is a great example of not being emotional manipulation. And I think that's one of the biggest differences. I mean, there are some surface differences between what Korngold and Steiner and composers like that were doing. I mean, we can obviously see that it's generally a vast orchestral template using the traditional European orchestra, kind of in the late Romantic operatic forces, which is what Korngold and Steiner are coming from in earlier than careers. The music tends to be fairly wall to wall. My impression, at least of the two films that I watched, the music is much higher in the mix than I notice in most films now. So the directors wanted you to hear it. So those are kind of surface things, but what stands out to me in terms of the role of music, other than that, is that it tends to not be either of those things. It's not ambient, and I don't think it's emotionally manipulative. I would characterize Korngold's music overall as very emotionally sincere. He's not trying to lead you to feel something. And I really imagine he would say that if the music is beautiful, it's only because what's on screen is already beautiful. If the music is X emotion, it's because it's already there. One interesting example maybe not that interesting, but something that really stood out to me from the adventures of Robin Hood. Pretty early on in the theme, Robin Hood is in the castle of Sir Guy, who is the main antagonist of the film, and he escapes. He single-handedly fights his way through the castle and gets out of the castle onto his horse. And at that moment, there's some really interesting music, that fascinating chord structure, but we get a sense of like triumphant relief, and that is something I don't think tends to happen in a lot of modern film scores. I think a modern score is not going to give you such a sense of like, I'm following what the main character is feeling. Generally, leading up to that, we've been following him when the main character clearly demonstrates an emotion. We follow that. That moment to me felt way more organic than what I tend to find. And that's why I say it's not emotionally manipulative. We're not being told, oh, this is a triumphant moment, so we need you to feel that, and here's the triumphant music. And it's really hard to define exactly how this is. I can't point to a specific technique necessarily, but it really feels like, to me, when this happens, the music is only matching what you already feel. I don't know if it's just like a delay. Again, I can't really put my finger on it, but that's something that kind of runs through both of these scores. So we're following what's on screen. If it's not on screen, we're not being given it. I guess one clear way we can see that is in the use of themes and characterizing characters. John Williams is fascinated by Korngold's music. He uses it, very much. Star Wars is supposed to be a return to Korngold's style. He literally, you can look it up on YouTube. Just look up Star Wars and King's Row, and you will hear lots of YouTube videos comparing the opening theme from Star Wars, the main title crawl, and the opening theme from Korngold's score for film King's Row. That's an intentional homage to Korngold. Williams wants to place Star Wars and wants to place the viewer in that kind of romantic world. The difference between them, and not a good or bad difference necessarily, is that for Korngold, when you get a villain, there's no music that tells you this is a bad character. Right? It's not something that Williams does, right? We have Darth Vader. We hear Darth Vader. We know exactly what Darth Vader sounds like. We know what the Emperor sounds like. We know what Lord Voldemort sounds like. All right, or any villain in his films. These villains in Korngold do not have music that sounds ominous. It's not telling us this is a bad character. I would say that generally, when you have these bad characters and they have their moments, it's very much following the characters themselves and what they think of themselves. So when we get Sir Guy and Prince John, who's ruling England falsely, it's kind of the overarching antagonist instead of like the direct antagonists, Knight Sir Guy. When they're together, we get very happy, festive music. Right? When they're celebrating, oh yay, I've taken over England from my brother. It's happy music. We don't get, we don't get these ominous notes or whatever that let us know this is the bad character and we're here to defeat them. That's something that's really fascinating to me. That music is following the character. can either you guys think of an example of that in a recent film where like the main, if it's a film that's kind of has themes in it, the antagonist doesn't have like a theme that lets you know that they're the antagonist?
Davy Jones's theme. I don't think it's necessarily evil. Yeah, I don't think it's like clearly like this is a sinister character. If you were to hear it without any sort of context to what the actual song is for. So yeah, and I think that actually makes sense because I guess spoilers, but in the movie that's been out for a billion years, he plays the song on his organ. He plays his own theme while thinking about his lover, right? So that's not the reason. Like the song for him is not an evil song, so it makes sense, that it's not it doesn't sound like that. It's something that is endearing, I guess, is the idea. Sort of, there are variation. Like the version he plays in the organ is a lot more of a, something that you play to your lover, than the generic use of it in the movie. But other than that, I can't really think of any such example.
I actually wouldn't have thought of that example myself. I don't think I can think of another one, honestly. Not off the top of my head. Almost every single one is like, no, that's an evil person.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if I watched more films, I might be able to find examples from that era where the antagonist is, given a negative theme. But that just, neither of those films, and there are plenty of moments with these antagonists, we don't get any of that. Another thing we really don't get is foreshadowing, unless the film, like the visual language of the film, is also foreshadowing. Otherwise, I think that's why I get the impression that with these films, what's in the music is what's being actually felt by the characters.
Would you say that there were more one-to-one with the image, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great way of saying what I'm trying to say. It's matching, and it's not trying to tell us things that we already know. I mean, it's not necessarily that like having a dark theme for an antagonist is insulting our intelligence. I wouldn't say that, but you don't necessarily need to know. I don't know. The first example that popped into my mind was another great modern orchestral score, "How to Train Your Dragon." Like when you see Grimmel, who's the antagonist of a third film, you don't need his theme to tell you that he's the evil character, right? It's obvious from one frame of him. I mean, that's not a good or bad thing. But it's very interesting to me that that's just not how these scores work. They're following what's on screen, and they're not trying to tell us things that we don't need to be told. I suppose a couple final and more general things is that these films have a dominant tone throughout, and that may have to do with like just film creation back then and trying to create one unified story. But generally, the music doesn't tend to vary in its tone that much. I mean, we got like a love scene. Well, it's obviously going to be more like romantic music, but in general, the action music is of the same sort of material, the same general sort of tone as the conversational music. So that's something that really stood out to me. I kind of going along with as you put it, Irving, the image and music being more one-to-one than now. I would say the music in that sense often seems to be as much of a character as the camera. I don't think that's really the case anymore. I think people, any director's going to say that the music is important, but they're going to put it below the visual language. And to me, it really seems like if it's not literally up there on the same level as the camera, it's much closer than it is now. music is as important in establishing the characters' emotions and like following those emotions and setting that up as the camera is, without doing it in an emotionally manipulative way, or without leading us to things that aren't there. Like I said, if camera's foreshadowing something or speech is foreshadowing something, the music will foreshadow it too, but otherwise we're not getting that foreshadowing. But I think, just from my general awareness of other films of that era, they tend to share some of those characteristics. So different. Obviously, the films themselves, are being created and conceived in very different ways than they are now. But I think it's interesting to note that the music, the role of music, I think, is changed, not necessarily for better or for worse. That's sort of the origins here in the United States, and I think it's important to look back on that and see, what we're kind of building off of, what the rules that we're breaking now, what those rules are and where they came from.
I really do feel like in the film world as a whole, I feel like there was like a deconstruction of everything, but it was an unintelligent deconstruction. Like it was like a deconstruction with no aim, no purpose, no real end in sight, really, in favor of like freedom. But people don't understand that like that freedom is like what your choices are a slave to you, right? Like, you may not, because you deconstructed without understanding what you were doing, you ended up being enslaved to your own lack of ability to communicate through the art form, because you never got there. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly instructive for me, being so familiar with the score as just an audio form, just to see how they actually work in the film. And it gives me, some more context to when people list all these rules, like that we don't want to follow anymore because that's too obvious of a musical effect. I mean, it's not as these things aren't as obvious as everyone says that they were. I don't know how many of these composers have actually sat down and watched a Korngold movie and looked at what the music actually did, instead of just thinking they know what music did in that time.
It might be the very case that the fact that the music has so much character makes them assume like that when they just listen to the score alone, that somehow was like makes the film feel like honky tonky or something like that, when really it's the composer really understanding how to use the image. It's like the opposite of what they think it is, from what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's certainly my impression. I mean, I still think Empire Strikes Back is like pinnacle of film scoring, but The Adventures of Robin Hood is like probably number 2 for me now. I mean, those are like the crown jewels of what music can do in film, and obviously the scores they do slightly different things, but there's just so much to learn by watching them, and like what film music can do for a story.
Do you want me to put the song in the whatever piece was that you sent earlier in the chat?
Yeah, if you want to put the link up, drop the link down in the chat, that would be cool. So that'd be good to leave that as a reference for you to go and listen to, and even if you don't watch a film, get a sense what the sound of the late 30s and early 40s was.
Yeah, I think you've convinced me to watch the movie at this point. So maybe I'll have a future episode of the like sort of more visually oriented perspective of it in the future.
I'll just end and say that The Adventures of Robin Hood in particular is famous for being, I don't know if it's the very first film to do this, but certainly I know it's the first Warner Brothers film. It's in like 3-part Technicolor, I think is what it's called. It's apparently a very important technical leap forward in terms of being in color with particular saturation that I know Roger Ebert finds to be the I think pinnacle of film coloration.
Actually, when I was looking for pictures to put in the thumbnail, actually, there's on the bottom, you can see a Photoshop cutout of Robin Hood. That's from the right version, right? That image?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I noticed immediately the colors were like vibrant, like crazy vibrant, and I was like, whoa, color grading from that era is very interesting. I was immediately interested as to why it was so saturated, and like saturated in a way that was like not abrasive, you know. And part of that definitely has to do with film. Film saturation looks very different from digital saturation, but it was very, very just full of life. So very interesting. So we've gone 2.5 hours. That is like pretty much entirely my fault. And I am so sorry for that. But luckily, this is the first week we decided to split into 3 parts. So if you are listening to this, what I'll probably do is I'll probably duplicate or triplicate, however you say it, the intro and conclusion onto each of the bits. And so you can watch whatever you're interested in. And if you like that, if you like the fact that we split into 3 different parts, give us a comment down below so that we know to keep doing that. If you prefer them all in one dosage, one package, rip me in editing it all in one night, but you know, I'll do it for you if you really want me to. The next best thing you could do, if you really enjoy this conversation, hit the like button if you're on YouTube, or follow us if you're on Twitch, or subscribe if you're on YouTube. You can see the growth that's happening here. We're slowly upgrading the show, and really what we'd really appreciate is just a little bit of love so that we can continue going, because we really love talking about these topics, and mixed media is all about keeping art alive through conversation. And with that, anything else you want to talk about? I guess if we wanted to sum up the lessons we learned here today is learn your finance, respect the past, and you know, don't forget, don't leave your audience behind. You know, welcome new people in. All right. So with that, have a great week for all of our listeners.
Thank you for listening.
See you next week.